Good morning. Welcome to House Appropriations. Today is Tuesday, March 18th. It's 9 a.m. We're after, sorry I'm late. House Appropriations is going to take up House Bill 67, an act relating to legislative operations and government accountability. And I believe we have two members from Joint Fiscal, starting with Tim Devlin to walk us through the bill.
Morning, committee members. Thank you very much for having me, Vice Chair Harrison, and committee members.
All right, I said Joint Fiscal, Legislative Council. So,
for the record, Tim Devlin, Legislative Council. Before you, committee members, you should have a bill as introduced that is H67, and that is an act relating to the legislative operations and government accountability, and also a brief one-page amendment offered by the Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. There are three instances of amendment in that. They're more scalpel than anything else, with the exception of striking out the entirety of Section 6. However, I think it may be best for me to just walk through the bill as introduced, and then when appropriate, this can kind of reference exactly where the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs opted to change things. Vice Chair Harrison, would you like me to provide any historical background for this, or kind of granular or more overarching? How would you like
in terms of the bill, we want to keep it kind of high level. It's not an extraordinarily long bill, but if you have some background that brought the committee to the bill, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. As committee members may or may not know, there was a government accountability committee composed of legislators that was dissolved, I believe, 2 summers ago, and then replaced by the Summer Government Accountability Committee, or Summer GAC. And they created some recommendations about what government accountability should look like as conducted by the legislative branch. And so those recommendations were then in turn put into a bill that was in front of House GovOps last year as well. And I don't think it really got out of there. But this is a refashioning of that bill. It's pretty similar. So anybody who has happened to have read the previous version will be fairly familiar with this one as well. That's the history in a nutshell. This bill, broadly speaking, it starts off with some purpose and findings that really go on to support the creation of a joint government oversight and accountability committee, which should be composed of members of the legislature, both House and Senate. It also does kind of a grab bag of other things, kind of correcting some typos when it comes to the chief performance officer report. Introduces some reporting requirements for the auditor of accounts, and moves a default due date for periodic reports as well. But the meat of this,
And if I could stop you, Wayne, go ahead.
Just on the history, as far as you're aware, when these committees were functioning in the past, did they ever have any type of meaningful output? Because many of these study committees end up having, or committees like this, they did do a report that goes up on the shelf someplace. Did it ever have any functional value in the past?
I can say that from my just being in the room during a testimony, and the dissolving of the first GAC was, I think, primarily because of frustrations that certain objectives that the committee was tasked with were too vague and not being met. And so there was a sense of frustration there, which I believe led to the creation of the Summer GAC to kind of be introspective and see exactly was GAC doing what the legislature, or what today's legislature, I should say, would be appropriate, and what the legislature looking forward would want to achieve when it came to government oversight and accountability.
And
Thank you. We had a thing that we worked on that I think came out of one of those early committees, called RBA, result-based accountability.
Yes.
And there was a lot of training on it, and it was the idea being that we were going to find solutions that were not going to cost a lot of money. We weren't going to look at, this is it in a nutshell. We weren't going to look at effort put into something. We were going to look at the effect that it had after it was done and how that helped the population, how that helped whatever the group was, population that was targeted to get the benefit. And that has been done, and it made it more interesting to sit down in a committee and ask people when they come in to say, well, we got 425 phone calls and, you know, blah, 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 and we're doing making our effort and you're justifying giving me this money. And the issue became then, well, what do 425 phone calls mean? That's the effort that's put in to receive these phone calls. But did anybody come out better at the end? How did those phone calls convert into something that was positive effect? Is that the focus of this bill, or are we doing just something else to make work?
I would say this is a departure from what the previous GAC, Government Accountability Committee, was responsible for executing, which does what you described is very accurate to my recollection. There's things like that, goals and outcomes, and some basically objectives focused on improving welfare and other broad categories of Vermonters' day-to-day lives. So things like public health oriented things. The classic example was more people smoking or not, something like that. This is the duties that this to be created joint government oversight and accountability committee would have are significantly different and broader, and I would describe them as more of a able to take up particular issues of execution of legislation, or maybe also could be described as backwards looking, almost pseudo audit like of legislation to see if it had the intended outcome as was originally conceived of when passed by the legislature. And we'll get into those certainly, if I can certainly walk through those in as much detail as the committee wants, so that you can have a fleshed out idea of what this committee will be doing, presuming it goes anywhere.
Okay. So continue on with your kind of overview of the bill and the amendment.
Sure. And I think it may just be helpful to read verbatim through the purpose and findings, because that will really kind of give a sense of context for the next part of the bill that has to do with actually creating a joint government oversight accountability committee and laying out its duties and responsibilities. So, and this purpose and findings section is based largely on the reports from the summer GAC committee and was in last year's iteration as well. Section 1, purpose. The purpose of this act is to actuate the principle of government accountability by focusing on how evidence is used to inform policy, how our state laws are carried out, and how legislation can best be formed to achieve its intended outcomes. This act strives to systematize government accountability efforts as much as possible with simple, clear, independent, objective, and fact-based processes, rather than to rely on individual legislators or individual committees to be effective. B, government accountability means the principle of demanding that legislation succeeds in achieving its stated policy goals through the provision of means by which to measure whether the policy goals have been met. The metrics for determining whether success has been achieved are as important as the goals themselves. C, government oversight means the mechanisms put into place to ensure that the bodies that are tasked with executing legislative intent are properly doing so. Oversight by the General Assembly, the examination of processes followed by the information produced by government officials, executing the law to determine whether those officials are properly and adequately achieving the policy goals established by the General Assembly. Now, indeed, those subsections are just purpose. They don't really have any substantive meaning, but I think do a good job of providing the flavor of the rest of the bill.
This is setting a standard of non-political or apolitical examination of our policies or re-examination of our policies with people who are by nature political. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's an accurate way to characterize it.
I just don't know that that has ever worked in this building during my time here when we've tried to have a sort of a standard apolitical committee trying to be above politics. And then looking back at the actions of committees or parties, political parties, or meetings that, decisions that get made that way. So I'm a little skeptical of, I'm not skeptical of accountability. I believe it's incredibly necessary. But I'm skeptical of performance review by, in a way that is twisted up in the way that we're elected, the way that we serve, the way that we represent our constituents. It's a very difficult place to put people. I think recently in the ethics commission, we've seen the difficulty in trying to put teeth to a goal. But I thank you for that. This is new language, or this is language that is pretty clear on what it tries to do. Just a little skeptical of whether it's possible in the atmosphere that we're living right now.
So I'm going to jump in here. Good morning, and I've missed the whole presentation, but I have a general sense of this. We're checking to see if somebody from GovOps should also come in as to talk about it, because you're supposed to tell us about the bill, and there's other parts of it that is not your purview, right? So the committee can be talking about that. But I will ask, and maybe somebody already asked this, because you were probably there during the discussions. Do you happen to know if either anybody from Legislative Council or Legislative Joint Fiscal Office were actually asked in to testify about this bill?
About this bill, this iteration of it, aside from how our office typically walks through bills and testifies in that sense.
Right.
We certainly did that,
Right.
myself and my colleague Tucker Anderson. But as far as how this bill could affect the operations of our office,
Right.
no.
You did not.
That was in a version of last year's bill, would have directly affected our office. As far as things like budgeting for some IT practices and report gathering and management, things like that for operations. JFO and
It's still
this is-
affected by potential,
But
right?
we haven't gone through the amendment in terms of what changes the committee make, right?
No, we haven't really gone through the real substance of this bill yet, or characterizing as minor modifications by the Government Operations Committee.
And go.
Yeah.
So now I'll direct the committee's attention to the bottom of page 2. This is the part of the bill pertaining to the creation of the Joint Government Oversight and Accountability Committee. Section 2 creates a new chapter under the Title 2. That's to do with the legislature. We'll create chapter 28 with a series of new sections in it. And I'll keep it very high level, and I can certainly pour down more as the committee likes. Section 971 will essentially establish the committee. It lays out how many members it will have. It will be 8 total, 4 from the House and 4 from the Senate. And there's a little bit more detail there, but I'll just skip that for right now. It addresses how the chair shall be elected, as well as the vice chair and clerk, and how those will rotate biennially. It points out that the committee shall meet as necessary versus on a scheduled basis, and then gets into and they can meet off session as well. And they would be supported by the professional clerical services of JFO, Ledge Council, and Office of Legislative Operations. Let's see. 972 has to do with the duties and powers, and here maybe I'll slow down and get into the detail a little bit more. The committee shall have duties as described in this section and elsewhere in law. And let's see. This is also where we have some of the language is modified, so I'll just read through it as it's presented and then reread it with the proposed amendment by GovOps committee. So section, let's see, 972A, and again, this is on page 4, starting on line 6. Duties, the committee shall have the duties as described in the section and elsewhere in law. 1A, the committee shall exercise government oversight by examining and investigating matters of significant public concern relating to state government performance. Right there, GovOps want to restate that as the committee shall have exercise of legislative oversight by examining and investigating matters of significant public concern related to state governance. And let's see. Then they want the next sentence modified to read, the committee shall examine the possible reasons for any failure of government oversight or any failure to properly implement policy and provide findings and tangible recommendations to standing committees of jurisdiction to prevent future failures. B, the committee will select issues of significant public concern to examine and investigate by a majority of the current committee members who have not recused themselves from the matter. Committee shall consider issues of significant public concern referred to the committee pursuant to a resolution adopted by either chamber of the General Assembly. The Government Operations Committee opted to remove that second sentence. So, yes.
I have a question on that section. So you said they removed the second sentence of section B.
Yes.
But it still says we'll select issues of significant public concern. How is that defined?
It is defined later on in the statute. Actually, the next subsection at the bottom of the next one gets into that. And so the significance of that modification is that how are issues brought committee before it could be by resolution by either chamber or the committee could select itself. Now it would be narrowed to GovOps committee would like it narrowed to just the committee selecting the issues itself.
And why would somebody recuse themselves?
Maybe a conflict of interest with either close family member, pecuniary interest, an outcome of something. If it's a matter of government contracting, that's me just kind of speculating, but there could matters of conflict of interest, may arise depending on what issues they look at.
We have, I see Representative Waters Evans here from GovOps. Thank you. We'll let council finish going, and then I think we may have some questions for you as well. So thanks for coming down.
The next section, subdivision, I should say C, this is where we get into the definition of issues of significant public concern. When we break into across the page, top of page 5, an issue of significant public concern means any issue that 1, affects the state as a whole, 2, affects a vulnerable population, 3, costs the state more than $100 million, 4, implicates a serious failure of state government oversight or accountability, 5, arises from previously enacted legislation, or 6, constitutes a failure to adequately respond to state or federal audits. And that or there is important because it could fit in any one of those categories, not necessarily has to check all those boxes. Okay. The next subdivision 2, committee shall, with coordination from Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules or LCAR, evaluate executive entities directed to adopt rules to ensure consistency and accountability in the rulemaking process. 3, the committee shall on an annual basis issue a report. And let's see, switch between. Okay. Does committee want to know exactly what's in the report? Should I just kind of keep ahead? Okay, that's I figured. And then B, powers of this committee. The committee shall have powers as described in the section of the law. The committee shall take or cause depositions to be taken as needed in any investigation or hearing. Then 3, section 3, that is, first annual report by the Joint Government Oversight and Accountability Committee. Essentially, the first time this committee will have to issue their report, it'll include kind of a special topic, which will be consideration whether they would like the legislature to grant them the additional power to issue subpoenas and administer oaths in connection with its examination, investigation of matters of government oversight and accountability related to those issues of significant public concern. And whether any staff may be needed to supplement their work or support the work. The next part of the bill pertains to Chief Performance Officer annual report. And it doesn't really do anything to that annual report. It just corrects the outdated name of the previous Government Accountability Committee, which is still in the books and had not been removed when the committee was dissolved. The next part of the bill pertains to the Auditor of Accounts and their duties in Section 5, and now we're on halfway through page 7. And this will add, let's see, a new subsection 6, where the auditor will have to provide a new committee with a written summary of all audits completed by their office. And upon request from the new committee, the auditor would have to provide, at the mutual convenience of both the committee and the auditor, a presentation to the committee of any completed audit. Section 6 has to do with annual audit of agency programs, pilot. And that is an additional report to be proffered by the Auditor of Accounts. This is a section, this section was struck in its entirety by the amendment, or is proposed to be struck in its entirety by the amendment offered by the Government Operations Committee. Periodic reports, Section 7, this is what I was saying before, changing that to kind of default due date from January 15th, pushing it earlier to November 15th for annual reports that come to this chamber, or both chambers. And let's see, that's really it.
What is the amendment?
The amendment goes in, and the most significant part of the amendment is striking out the section pertaining to the auditor, Section 6, the annual audit of agency programs, the pilot program that they would set up. And then also, most significantly, I would say, it changes how issues are referred to, or how issues come before the new committee, removing that bit where either chamber by resolution can refer an issue to the committee, leaving it only up to the committee to select itself what issues it would examine.
That's a big one. That's wait.
So section 6, is that gone?
If the amendment is stopped, yes.
Okay.
So
So
this is a GovOps amendment that they've already approved.
will this section change the frequency with which the auditor audits each agency in the state?
Removing this section will have no effect on how the auditor conducts itself. No.
So back up on page 5. Let's see, it talked about failure to adequately respond to state or federal audits is one of the things that they would be looking at, right?
Yes.
I mean, each agency, if you fail a federal audit, say, and you don't properly respond to the corrections that are required, they simply stop your money.
That certainly could be a consequence.
So what conceivable use could this committee provide to, when we've already got pretty serious checks and balances in there already for this kind of thing?
I don't know if I could really.
That may be a question that we want to ask the committee members, so we'll ask them to do that. So I also want to get Chris Root from JFO, I believe, is going to do the fiscal note. So do we have any more questions for Tim? Yes.
Just I think one of the most important pieces that I've spied while reading this is the potential application for the right to subpoena for depositions. That's not a frequent, committees generally in the legislature don't have that. Can you relate Or should I ask that question of the committee?
I can briefly comment on that. You're correct, that is a rare power. I think we've seen it most recently in the impeachment. The House panel was granted that subpoena power. And I don't think any other committee does have it currently.
And just to be clear, if you're subpoenaed, you are obligated under penalty of law to tell the truth and to give the truest information that you know. Whereas the testimony we take, generally speaking, is testimony that is considered voluntary. And it is not necessarily the levels of accuracy in the testimony are a lot lower than they would be if that person were subpoenaed.
Well, candor before a tribunal should be expected by anybody testifying in the chair before any committee members. I would characterize the importance of subpoena power is compelling an individual to proffer information and to show up and provide absolutely truthful information. And you're right, it would comes with penalties as well. But that compulsion is really the driving kind of characteristic.
I would just want to add one thing, and then Lynn's got a question. Last year's bill, which I wasn't terribly familiar with, but I do know it got held up in the Senate. It went to judiciary because they were issuing subpoena authority, giving subpoena authority in the bill. This is deciding whether we should give it. So that is a different from last year. But this has come up before. It came up in last year's bill that we passed out of the House. And then that's where it ended, is Senate judiciary. So we have that. Lynn?
Yeah, I've got two questions. I just want to follow up on the issue of the subpoena. My understanding is when you're subpoenaed, you're sworn in. I've been in government hearings where people are all sworn in and they're not only expected to tell the truth, they are under perjury if they don't tell the truth. So we don't do that here.
Sure.
I mean, maybe they did it for the impeachment thing, but that was a one shot. Yeah.
No, I think it's fair to characterize there's an expectation of truthfulness when testifying before a committee. Are there consequences for deviating from that?
Well, perjury would be if you're sworn in, you'd
Sure.
be charged with a crime. That's just my own personal statement to that follow-up on Representative Stevens. The other question I have here is on section 4 on page 6. The chief performance officer, we have a chief performance officer in the governor's office, and they've fiddled around with the language to go and make a new chief performance officer, or are they talking about the same chief
The
performance
same
officer?
one, yes.
So they're going to tell the governor's office what they can do as far as this chief performance officer is doing?
No, that is only in the bill because there was references to the old committee, which no longer exists, the Government Accountability is GAC. But when that was dissolved, not all references to it were actually taken under statute. So I would characterize that section as being the technical correction.
But
Now,
it does refer, in the end, it does refer to a chief performance officer may submit to this committee information, blah, 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 and then they can go back and ask for, maybe you need to explain the next paragraph.
sure. And sorry, where in what page in the bill?
On page 7,
Okay.
C1 and 2.
Okay, it's page 7. Okay,
Well, it says 6 and 7.
okay, so at the bottom of page 6, so we have 4, Chief Performance Officer Annual State Outcomes Report. So C has to do with approving population level indicators, and this is largely what the previous iteration of the Government Accountability Committee was concerned with looking at, and they would be provided information by the Chief Performance Officer. And yes, no, you're right. Sorry, I misunderstood your point before. So the way that the Chief Performance Officer submitted information to the prior Government Accountability Committee would continue in the sense where they would be providing it to this Joint Government Oversight and Accountability Committee now, of which the Joint Government and Oversight and Accountability Committee could receive that, review that, and request additional information from the Chief Performance Officer, it looks like here. And that's really this section says to that effect. And I would say that further that that would be one item of which, potentially many others or few others, depending on how much work this new committee wants to take on. That information, as well as other issues of significant public concern, certainly be then within the wheelhouse of this new.
So they would expect to hear back on their request from the chief performance officer as to addressing the population level indicator, things that actually I talked about before from the RVA. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mike, did you have a question?
I appreciate the questions. I just wonder if these are questions better for the committee than the staff legislator, staff lawyer who's just writing on behalf of the committee members.
Yes.
Fair point.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any other questions for Tim? Thank you. Don't go away. In case we
You're very welcome.
appreciate it. Chris, let's get you up and then we'll get our two representatives from GovOps. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. For the record, Chris Roop from Joint Fiscal. This will be short and sweet. You all have the fiscal note posted on the committee webpage. Since the bill creates a new legislative committee with 8 members who would be entitled to expenses and compensation for meetings that are held when the legislature is not in session, that would be approximately $2,000 per meeting.
But we're eliminating a committee as part, the gap is gone, right?
Yeah, they're already gone.
They're already gone.
Yeah.
We are starting new.
So creating, and the extent to which this committee is active and meets obviously will impact the budgetary impact, but roughly $2,000 per meeting based on sort of the estimates that we use to figure out how much we think legislative working groups are going to cost. The other things I wanted to flag were though the bill does not contain any appropriations or create any new positions, it does stipulate that in the first annual report, that the committee is to weigh in on whether there is recommendations for a dedicated staff person in the legislature to support this work, as well as identify any additional needs that the committee might need. So the extent to which those are identified could result in future pressures on the legislative budget in order to resource. So that could be not just an additional staff person, but it could be contracted professional services. We don't know what that request would look like, but we've flagged the fact that this could lead to additional demands on the legislative budget moving forward.
Which would require further discussion by this committee and for any appropriations that would have to come through this committee side. But that's right, there's a great unknown. And the 2,000 is for the 8 people?
Correct, the 8 legislators.
Okay.
That's your expense.
That's what it costs now. 8 people is $2,000 a meeting.
Roughly, some people have shorter commutes than others, but whenever
That's your average, what you assume to do.
we're planning, yeah.
So. Okay.
Do we have an estimate of how many meetings they will have?
The bill does not specify.
That not at all, they could end up with something big and meet 25 times, so that's, yeah.
This wouldn't account for any time that the governor's accountability person would have or any other people that would come before this committee.
No.
Any
That's their job.
Those are already fixed costs. Yeah.
cost. They're diverted from something else.
Well, there is accountability. It seems to me you've asked a lot of questions about accountability, Wayne, so here we go. Any questions for Chris? Don't go away. Thank you very much. Let's get our 2 folks from House Government Operations and Military Affairs. Thank you for coming down on short notice.
Certainly.
And if you would introduce yourselves, please, for the record.
Representative Shea Waters Evans from Government Operations.
Representative Matt Byron, Chair, Government Operations, Military Affairs. Thanks for having us down. Representative Waters Evans is the reporter of the bill and one of the sponsors, so I'm here in a secondary fashion.
She's in charge. Okay. So I think, was there a question you asked at the beginning when I was coming in that maybe it's appropriate to ask these guys?
Yeah, if that's all right.
Please.
So, this bill proposes to create a committee that's striving to be apolitical in its deliberations over particular issues. But it's made up of political party individuals. I imagine all three parties would be involved or would be appointed to this in some kind of equal way. How do we have numerous examples over the past, say, the time I've been here, where we've strived for that kind of apolitical, everybody's in it together kind of thing, and we're going to put our party affiliations aside and our political stance aside. How does that work here? And if you could address it by like giving us an example of what you imagined when how this committee would work on what issues, which branch of government, and how it will work, because that's not clear in here what a serious event is or what's something that would come before here. But I'm just concerned over on the top that by stating that this is going to be apolitical work in a political environment during a very politically active period, I don't get it. I understand what you're striving for, but I don't get it in response to what might be necessary today.
Well, I mean, the optimistic answer is that future legislators and politicians who are on this committee will not be so, and they will all cooperate well together. But in the absence of that optimism, I would say that it's not arranged to be a willy-nilly process where they're just, arriving, they're in their committee meeting and just saying, who should we pick on today? But more that it's a sense of, we have the guidelines within the bill that say what would constitute a matter of significant public concern, so that it's not, that gives them parameters that they can work within to make sure that it's deliberate and that there's a reason to be looking into something, as opposed to just a personal feeling, or I don't like this department, or my sister's ex-husband works here and I would like to investigate them. Like, it's really trying hard to keep those things out of it. Well, you know what I'm saying? Like, well, it's Vermont. All those things come up all the time. Right? So I think by having those parameters put on and those guidelines put in on what programs can be looked at, or agencies and stuff, and having not only just separate parties, at least not more, I believe it's not more than 2 people from each party or a party on the committee. It's made up of both House and Senate members. And the chair of that committee switches every other biennium, so that there's not one party that would have the chairperson be running the committee for more than one biennium in a row.
So can you give us an example of not a witch hunt, not a trivial matter, but what would come before this committee, this accountability committee? Is it asking accountability of the executive branch, the judicial branch, only the legislative branch? Is this something that is, I'll just leave it there. Can you just give us I have to assume that in conversation that there was, what if this happened?
Yes, I am not going to name any specific department, agency, commission, committee, or anybody who we believe should be, or who anyone had in mind when we were creating this bill. But doesn't seem fair. It's more to say that even one of my co-sponsors of this bill, may be shocking to you in this room, but government spending isn't always efficient. And the programs that we create are not always, despite their good intentions, don't always live up to their potential, or things don't go the way that they're supposed to. And there's not always a check back. There's not always, I mean, we put the check back in the report and all the stuff back in a bill, but there's not always follow through on those things. And we know that there are programs within different agencies and departments that, despite those great intentions and the good people working on them, they're not achieving their goals. So then we say, why are we continuing to support these programs financially with taxpayer money if they're not working correctly or accomplishing what they were set up to accomplish. Is that too vague? I can't think of like a specific.
But I understand your,
Okay.
and final question, just, and do you think you will really need subpoena power to get those answers?
I am not the person who is on the committee creating the report that will decide if subpoena power is needed or not. So I cannot answer that question. I know, as Chair Shai said earlier, that it was part of the bill last biennium when we were working on it, and it was not popular. So for understandable reasons, it's a pretty big power, and to assign that to a committee would be significant. And I think that we would have to really be deliberate and careful about whether or not that was something that was necessary. Because as you pointed out, there are many other systems in place for the checks and balances. But I think it's important to consider.
I do as
Okay,
well.
I'm gonna, we have to move on. We're running late behind already. I'm gonna, John and then Wayne, and then I have a question.
Okay.
Morning, thanks.
Good morning.
Thanks for putting this together. So this is obviously driven because the previous committee is no longer here for sure. It's looking to kind of recreate something that would be better, more effective here, whatever. And on page 5, there's an array of areas that issue may come up. You know, everything from affecting the state as a whole, global populations, extraordinary costs to stay here, and some others. I'm not going to go through all those there. But when you were having some conversation about, putting that, and I don't have the familiarity as others may have with what it may look like, and just if it had this array of categories in it. One question here, but are there 1 or 2 areas that you would anticipate perhaps issues coming up? Not to name an agency or anybody on the spot, because I agree that's not part of your purview here, you're doing that here, really. There are a couple of areas that you think might be more often looked at. You kind of use government like costs, for example.
Yeah.
Efficiencies.
Yeah, efficiency, because that's the whole point, is to hold ourselves accountable for things that we have created and to make sure that they're working. And, in theory, the intent is to streamline things so that we are not spending money in the future on stuff that's not working. This bill came from, as mentioned, a bill from last biennium. And that was based on, and I can send the committee assistant a report if you would like to look at it. There was it was 2023. There was the GAC, the Government Accountability Committee, and then there was the summer GAC. And a lot of the work that we did in 23 created the bill that we worked on last biennium. Those people who are on that committee made that bill. This has some portions of it with the more sticky situations removed from it, because I think that, and our committee voted this out, pretty agreeably, that this is an important program that needs or this is an important step that needs to be taken, with the understanding that maybe some of those initial recommendations were a little too enthusiastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I share Rep. Stevens' original concerns and along that way, but more importantly, in my mind, is when you go back to what John was just talking about, state as a whole, things that is vulnerable populations, $100 million, all these things these are major issues. And so if we put together a group of people that don't have specific skill sets, because in order to look into these things, if I was gonna be asked to do this, I'd like to have a team with an accountant on it, with, people with various skill sets that would be able to understand state government and the way things operate in order to really dig in and get something done. And if you were to do that, it would take a lot of meetings. But if you're not gonna do that, and you're gonna do it with political people involved, then I can't see how you're ever going to be able to dig deep enough to make any informed decisions. And if you don't do that, you're just going to come up with a report that's going to sit on the shelf again, like so many other reports that we do. That's my concern. Is it going to be worth the money? Are we going to get anything valuable out of it at all?
The hope is that something valuable would come out of it, which is that we are identifying ways in which we're spending the money that doesn't need to be spent, or putting time and effort into programs that aren't serving Vermonters anymore. I think yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It's a big job. And as, hopefully as citizen legislators, we come to the table, or the committee would come to the table with a variety of skill sets that would be able to do some of the work. And that the report would perhaps inform future bodies, whether it's the auditor's office or the heads of those departments or agencies or whatever it is, and would prompt them to do maybe some of that more, investigatory work. I don't know if that's too charged for it, but, look into it more to see if there's something of merit there that should be pursued further.
Matt, did you want to respond also?
Yeah, no, and I know we're tight on time, so I just wanted to save this piece. I had a lot of these same thoughts, if not all of these same thoughts, as this thing developed. And so I just like the overarching tenet of this for me is to it's not just about the administration, it's about us as well. We put forward laws, we put forward directives. And now I feel that it's time for us to be able to put something in place. It provides the capacity to go back and see how the legislative intent is being executed, especially with some of these bigger dollar programs. Is the money being used in a way that is executing the legislative intent and also making Vermonters' lives better? So it's almost sort of an assessment, right? Like a performance audit on directives that we've put forward. So that's just sort of my headspace here. Happy to speak to it more. I know we're tight on time. Now to the subpoena piece, that is something that I think is a very valuable tool to consider. I am one of the members who served on the special committee on impeachment inquiry. And that tool was very valuable when we ran into barriers with information gathering. And just the fact that we had the tool was valuable. We didn't necessarily have to use the tool. It was just the awareness of it provided us with information in a more expedient manner or got us through some speed bumps, shall I say.
I have a question and then let's take a sentence question. So I could also say, I mean, it does feel sort of broad and the committee decides. I'm curious why the resolution part was taken out. If you took out the rest, it'll be some.
Yep.
The auditor piece of it, was that it? Or wait, what was it?
That
Sorry.
the committee shall consider issues of significant public concern referred pursuant to a resolution adopted by either chamber. So you took it out. I mean, I could see it being one of the options, but I'm curious as to why it was actually struck out.
Yeah.
972.
Yep, I'm looking at it right now. I believe that section was removed. I believe the intent was to not have it appear in any way to be a political situation, right? Was that why we removed it?
Exactly.
And really to be careful. And we had that whole section also that gave that did some work with the auditor, which is, an elected position. So we are trying to remove any political barrier,
Okay, so that could still happen. The legislature still has the ability to do a resolution if they want to do it, but it's not a requirement of anything.
Yes.
Okay,
What we were trying to do there was make it a less political tool where one of our bodies could drive something that was maybe,
okay.
a soundbite du jour, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Thank you. And so my other question, and I should have been asking you and not Ledge Council, and sort of following a little bit up on what Wayne said about having actually, it's not going to just be 8 legislators sitting in a room saying, what do we want to do? You're going to need support from our own legislative staff. And so I'm wondering if you took testimony from anybody from Joint Fiscal Office or Legislative Council, not to write this, but as how it would impact them and what their thoughts were. You did not.
No, but maybe we should have. That would be a wonderful thing for the Senate to do.
Seems to me if they're going to be involved, we ought to be asking
Yeah.
what they're. Okay.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you. Lynn?
Yeah, I just want to say this is a very aspirational bill. I happen to agree with both Representative Stevens that this is a political issue that is going to be done in an apolitical way that actually won't work. My experience here. Number two, I also agree with Representative Rush that you're going to need to do this really properly. I mean, we're all a bunch of amateurs here, really. We really don't know the stuff that we really need to back up and get information on. We all have individual stuff, but those 8 people may not have all of it. So you're going to need real experts to be able to sit down and examine it. And I think that it, I mean, certainly we're all for accountability, but you know, the auditor actually does do some reports and they're on issues that are, well, doesn't take, we all know that once something is created, it is very hard to get rid of it because it has its constituency. And nobody has the political will or the circumstances to really sit down and say, okay, we're going to end that unless it's a government accountability committee. But the point is that the auditor has done reports on things and said, well, this was good in the beginning, but that was 10 years ago and nothing new has been done. There hasn't been the mission hasn't been accomplished since then, those first few years. But nobody here is going to get rid of that. We're still appropriating money to it. We're still doing things with these groups, whatever they need. We've got duplication all over the place, every which way we look, all across the board. So I just question whether this is even going to be practically possible. I mean, did that come up at all in your discussions about any kind of dissenting voices? Is this going to work?
Sure.
And what was the response?
The response is that if myself and the other sponsoring the bill and our committee that, you know, discussed it and have these discussions, voted it out, that we felt like it was something that was important enough right now. We struggle. You people have been working so hard on the budget, and there's not a lot of money to be spent on things, and that hopefully we can, you know, look within our own pockets and see some places where we can tighten our belt, and that would be enough of a priority for everybody to be able to rally around and hopefully support and see if it can make a difference. You know, I think my hope is that, you know, failures of past committees of this, we'd be able, or, you know, by we, I mean, this committee would be able to learn maybe from the hurdles that they had and see if they could find ways to streamline the process and work together and not run into those problems again and really make a difference.
I'm going to move this along. Thank you. Tiff and then Tom, and then we'll be done, I think.
I just want to respond to that. I guess I feel that to not have this, we cede our responsibility in trying to ensure that the work we do and the work that state government outside the legislative branch does is doing what we intended and is efficient and et cetera, et cetera. We get ups and downs. This committee doesn't get to dig down into budgets, and we'd have to be meeting from September forward to be able to do that. But it just seems to me that it is aspirational, but most legislation is aspirational, I think. I would welcome an opportunity. The auditor can't do everything, and doesn't have a very big office. So I guess I would welcome that additional help in understanding how we're doing.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I just wanted to be clear, I don't think I meant it, I did not mean it to say that it will not work. That's important because I think it may work. And I am always going to vote yes on the side of good governance. This does, as Representative Bloom said, address a need that this committee, in my limited time here, has noticed that we can't get into the details the way that we want in order to be accountable. We're trusting that the information that we're getting is accurate and clean. And even if it is, and when it is, which has got to be most of the time, it's really hard to process it all. So I applaud the aspirations of the committee to try to put it in place, in some place where this accountability committee to have a plan to support the committee vote on this.
And I think, in a political environment with these, political situations, I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that we don't want to spend more money that, taxpayers are giving to the state, and that we want to make sure that we're efficient and held accountable. I think anyone in this room would agree with that. So I think that's a really good place to start, and the basis of
Committee
it.
voted on this?
1101.
11.
Sorry, 1001.
10-01, yeah.
Yes,
I just,
we had someone.
All members present voted in the affirmative.
yes, okay, great. Thank you very much for coming
Thank
down.
you.
We appreciate it. I don't think we have other questions for anybody else. We're not going to vote on this right now. We'll think about this. So we appreciate that. But I do want to see if people are now ready to vote. We would have voted yesterday on the VEDA bill, the 398. So are people comfortable doing that? And then after we do that voting, then we'll take a break. Okay. I have another meeting about budget adjustment at 11. So it's one of those days. So if I'm correct, well, who's doing this bill? You are. Sure, right. They can run right now, but it's not. Yes, we can. Thomas is here. So, yeah, so this is H 398. We have my council in here and they left because they see we were going to with the other bill. So on our mini page, we, and it's actually on today's, we have from Cameron, the amendment where we strike out the money. Is that what we're striking out?
No,
Are we striking out?
reference to the money, yeah.
The reference to the money. It's only, the whole bill is only, it's a lot of sections, but we're striking out, this is the second to last section, and so we're just moving the effective date out. You may recall this is because the money already exists, it's in BGAP, we're just repurposing it to code of VEDA to start this disaster. Okay, that's everybody, including me, are we all reoriented on what it is we're doing?
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So first we need to vote on the amendment, and I entertain a motion to approve the amendment, draft 1.1.
Make a motion to approve, draft 1.1 of, so
Great.
to the appropriations amendment to H 398.
Thank you. Is there anybody who wants to second, even Jim? Okay. Okay, we have seconds. All right, is there any further discussion on that? If not, is the clerk ready to call the roll?
Representative Bloomley,
Yes.
Representative Dickinson,
Yes.
Representative Harrison,
Yes.
Representative Kanczenska,
Yes.
Representative Moravicki,
Yes.
Representative Roche, yes, she said, yes. Okay, Representative Niger,
Yes.
Representative Squirrel, yes, Representative Stevens.
Yes.
Representative Yakavoni
Yes.
and Representative Shaw,
Yes.
1100.
Thank you. And now we need a motion to approve 398, and I have to see, is it as amended or is
As
it?
amended by appropriate.
Okay, but they didn't amend their bill. Either bill, that's what I'm checking.
Oh, so
Theirs
That-
was amended, I think.
Did they,
was
yeah,
there's a strike amendment?
let me just check.
I'm pretty sure this was a strike.
It's not a strike vote.
Striking, it was a strike off.
Yeah.
So how do we say this, Jim?
So
Do you
we,
want to make the motion?
sure. Move that we adopt H, what was it, 398 as amended by House Committee on Commerce, further amended by House Committee on Appropriations.
Sounds just right. Thank you. But, you must have been a clerk. Is there a second to that? John, okay. Any further discussion on this? Okay, hearing none, we'll call the roll, please.
Representative Bloomley,
Yes.
Representative Dickinson,
Yes.
Representative Harrison.
Yes.
Representative Kanczenska,
Yes.
Representative Roche,
Yes.
Representative Moravicki,
Yes.
Representative Niger,
Yes.
Representative Squirrel, yes, Representative Stevens.
Yes.
Representative Yakavoni.
Yes.
Representative Shaw.
Yes, 1100. Tom will be the reporter. Tom is the reporter. And so Trevor will do his clerk thing and then you'll respond and send it off to Nigel and it'll be on the calendar. Lynn?
Yeah, this is a technical question, but when it's a strike all, it just comes to us without any the existing language is part of it. This is a lot of existing language and a lot of marked out language.
Right.
So how does that become a strike?
Because it said that this is a strike off.
It said,
And it says it right in here, by striking out all after the enacting clause and inserting in lieu of the following.
okay.
So if Ledge Council writes that it's a strike all, then
And that's what.
I'm going with that.
By striking out, okay.
Yeah, and we don't decide that.
I thought a strike all was like where they put it all together and brand new. It may not be
Well,
exactly-
It's considered brand new. It could still be 90% of what the bill was
Before,
introduced, but because there might have been substantial revisions in certain ways, like this bill that we just passed, or we didn't pass, we didn't vote on the government operations bill. It's not a strike all, it's in instances of amendment, because it's just quote unquote simpler amendments. So anytime sections change, anytime there's enough language change, it becomes easier
Yeah.
to represent it as a strike all rather than as a
Right, and
violation.
we have 12 instances of amendment, everybody on the floor is doing this.
Yes, I know, it's easier to prevent a strike all.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty crazy. So, Cameron, thanks for coming back. We just passed out the bill. We appreciate that. On to whatever is next for you. So committee, we're probably gonna get some more bills today. That's what I'm thinking from the floor, so we'll see how that is. Did everybody get their 5 and 5 priorities to Maria? Email
No, not
those?
yet.
Oh, no. I was wondering if you gave me finance, I didn't know.
Okay, if you haven't done that, send it immediately, please, because then we will activate that. I think I mentioned I have another meeting to discuss the budget adjustment. I feel like I've got my own whiplash going on, at 11, so I'll be doing that. So, I'll check in with Maria and Emily as to when we can get these things back. What the other part of the budget, though, is language. So if you have things that you know are going to need language or need language changes, this would be a really important time to talk about. I mean, to work on that. We can go away and work on that. Mike.
One of the things I've been wrestling with is around adult education.
Yes.
And what I got from Beth St. James at Ledge Council is that there seems to be a discrepancy between statute language and rule. And there may be the need to clarify this with the language. I was pointing next door where education used to be.
Oh, yes.
I was
Sort of over that way.
They were here.
They were here.
I would guess that language needs to come from there.
Yeah, I think if you can, and talk to somebody there. We thought we had solved this last year, and so it is a bit frustrating that here we are again after almost 4 years of trying to figure this out. And so, if you want to do a little huddle with them and maybe with that and just make a decision, and if they can't make a decision, the Senate may have to make a decision. I'd rather, if we could get it done, that would be great. And the other piece that I've actually had some conversation about language around is with the $4 million of education transformation money. Because this committee doesn't just give $4 million and say,
I
here you go.
appreciate your suggestion though, where we had a precedent with another.
Right, so I will follow up on that. If you could follow up on the AELs, I'll follow up on this piece of it. Divide and conquer. But all of you should be looking at, some of you may not have anything, but if we're adding a position or where you think we are, or we need more prescriptive language, you want to make sure it's clear. So just look at, if you have any questions, we can talk to Maria and Emily about that or me. So we'll take a break, just trying to figure out what we're gonna do.
Maria.
That's one, especially if Mike sent it off to Maria right now. You've done it, okay.
Like,
So let's get back in at 10:30 and we'll see where we are.